Hey YouTube, so I am coming on here to talk about this book I just finished reading, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. Okay, so this book, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, you probably can't see actually the two white people because it's not raised, but it's indented in, so you really can't see it. I think that's pretty cool. But anywho, it's by this author, Reni, I might say this name wrong, Reni Eddo-Lodge. I know I said the Lodge part right, but it's actually, I think, her first book, and she is a UK based blogger. And I think her blog, I don't know what her blog is called, but she wrote this post one day about why she's no longer talking to white people about race, and it went viral. And so I guess from there it just sparked this book. I really enjoyed the book, so I'll just talk to you about some of the highlights for me personally. Basically, the book is divided into 7 chapters. So the first chapter was the histories. This author is from the UK. And so what was really interesting to me was just to get that perspective on racism from someone outside of the US. Because honestly, and she even mentioned this in the book, when you think of racism against black people, slavery, America, it takes center stage. She talks about slavery, who owned slaves. They actually owned slaves, and their slaves were based in the Caribbean, on the Caribbean island, all of those islands that were ruled by Britain. Because she talked about how those slave owners, they didn't get an opportunity to see the torture or the pain that was being inflicted on these people. And it's different for, you know, the slave owners that were in the US, because they were actually there. They were actually seeing what these people were going through. And I think she made that point to try to say that it was easier for, or maybe easier for those slave owners to not have any type of conviction when it comes to treating these people the way that these people are being treated. And that, you know, if you possibly had the opportunity to see these people being tortured and abused, then, you know, maybe it would affect you and affect your morals, or, you know, just you as a human being. But to be completely honest, I don't think that made a difference either way. She goes on, she basically goes from like slavery up into modern day times, explaining the history of racism, and it pretty much mirrors had happened in the US. Then the next chapter went on to talk about the system. She's talking about this racist structure, this racist system that we have, that's in place, that basically puts people of color, or black people, at a disadvantage. The next chapter, it goes into what is white privilege, and I think that talks to why it's so hard for any person who's not being discriminated against to understand that there is a system in place that puts others at an unfair advantage. Saying, how do you explain what white privilege is? She explains it as an absence. It says, how can I define white privilege? It's so difficult to describe an absence. And white privilege is an absence of the consequences of racism and absence of structural discrimination. And when you talk about it, hopefully those people will try to get an understanding of what that's like. I think the whole point is, with white privilege, it's hard to really explain, but and then if you benefit from it, it's hard for you to even say that there's something wrong. If you're benefiting from something, why would you say something's wrong with the system? It's like with the tax code, if you are benefiting from the way that the tax law is written, why would you ever say, hey, you know what, I need you to charge me more taxes? You wouldn't do that. It's just really hard to really explain, to get people to understand. And I think that's the whole reason why she got to a point where she was saying, hey, I'm no longer talking to white people about race. So another interesting point she made, because people feel like, hey, we have mixed couples, we're having mixed race children, we don't feel that racism is probably a thing of the past, right? And she actually interviewed, I don't know if it was like a friend of hers or whatever, but it was this girl who was mixed race. And she said that her family, I think her mom was white and her dad was black, but she spent most of her time with her white family as she was growing up. They pretty much got along together as she was growing up. They were really close. She was saying how when she got older, she started, I guess, learning about certain issues happening in the world, especially as it pertains to racism and some certain things that might have happened. And she started becoming aware that, hey, we might have this system that, in place where, it might be a little unfair towards a certain group of people. And I guess she started getting into that, and that side of her family wasn't really feeling it like that. So when she would talk about those things, she said that they kind of withdrew from her. And even to this day, she was saying how, she really isn't as close to that side of her family as she once was. And even her mom, she said, would say certain things that would kind of come off as being racist. And you would think, hey, okay, if my mom decided, you know what, I'm going to get with this black man for whatever reason, maybe she was in love, maybe they were just fooling around, whatever, I don't know, but ended up having a child, right? Maybe they might have even got married, right? So you would think they understand, they don't see me as being any less than them, you know what I'm saying? Because if you're willing to make love to a person of a certain person, if you're able to share your body with them, if you're able to share your home, your life, you would think that that person doesn't think any less of that person, not in terms of being like, racist. But it was interesting because I've kind of read a few instances where it's like that you have these people who get in these mixed marriages, and sometimes the person might say some things that's out of pocket, and you're like, really, like, you thought enough to marry this person and to have children with them and to share your life, and then you say certain things. I don't know, maybe they try to justify it by saying, I was just kidding or whatever. I don't know. I don't know the circumstances, but it's just interesting to see, because it's like you would think that they would be the most progressive. Maybe not. The next chapter, she talked about fear of a black planet. And so in this chapter, she goes into how they are against immigrants coming in. And she was talking about how they are fearful of there being this this world where I guess they're outnumbered, if you will, or I don't know if she might have talked more so about what underlines that fear. Yeah, I think they just want to preserve it as it is. They don't want it to be different. They don't want someone to come in and change what the country has has been, or what it is. Honestly, I had never really tripped off of immigration. I mean, I know here in the United States we have immigration issues, and they're always talking about it, especially when in terms of like, you know, fear of terrorism and stuff like that. It was interesting to me because, like I said, I had never really paid much attention to immigration, to be truthfully honest. I think what she, and I might be wrong, but what the author is trying to convey is that it's just another way of racism to be implemented by saying, hey, we don't want any outsiders to come in. And most of the outsiders are people who don't look like them, who are, and it could be a whole host of people in Britain because there's so many countries over there surrounding them. It makes me want to know more about immigration and you know, why should we be against it, or why should we be for it? Third to last chapter talks about the feminist question. Now this was really interesting to me as well because honestly, again, I never really paid much attention to feminism. I remember reading about it in like middle school, but in middle school I was a little, you know, not doing my work like I should have been, so I kind of skipped out on probably some of those readings. But when I was little, I always thought of it as like this white woman's thing. You know, I thought like feminists, when I think of a feminist, I think these white women burning bras. Like, I just never knew much about it and never really was too interested in knowing much about it. And this young woman here, this author, is black, and I guess she says she identifies herself as a black feminist. But the chapter, what it talks about is how feminists, white feminists, they are fighting for equality. They're fighting for fair treatment of all people, right? Especially, you know, women, you know. But what the author is talking about in this chapter is how can you feel like that, but whenever someone brings up, you know, race, white feminists seem to steer clear or feel like, hey, you know, that's not what we're about. But in the end, if you're fighting for fair treatment or equality for all people, including women, then wouldn't you be concerned about racism? Wouldn't you be concerned about people, you know, of different races being unfairly treated? Towards the end, she talks about the angry black woman. When they were talking about the angry black woman thing, it made me really like, hey, is this what feminists are talking about? Because it's really interesting, because it was saying how black women are, her anger makes her ugly and undesirable. For that reason, she will never find a husband, and if she does, she will emasculate him. There's a stigma to speaking up and being a woman. If you feel that a woman can emasculate a man by just speaking up, then you're making assumptions about the characteristics of men that inevitably, well, actually, this is exactly what she's saying. I think I wrote this word for word. This makes assumptions about the characteristics of men that inevitably limits the scope of their humanity. To believe in emasculation, you have to believe that masculinity is about power and strength and dominance. As a black woman, I try not to, you know, be too aggressive. I try not to be too outspoken because and get too emotional because of that phrase, angry black woman. It's unfortunate because a lot of times I end up not truly being myself. You just don't want to be seen as this angry black woman. The last two chapters about race and class, and how people feel like, well, you know, hey, is it just a class issue? You know, is it just that it's not necessarily because you're black, but maybe because you're uneducated and you live below the poverty line, that you feel like you're unfairly treated, you know? And I think we all know what that's about. There's a lot you can say about that. Some people might think that, you know, it's just a class thing, but a lot of times certain people might think that, hey, people are in this class because of their race. And that's what she talks about also, about how, you know, despite, you know, the class you might be in, you still can be affected by racism. And the last chapter just talks about there's no justice, there's just us. You know, pretty much, how do you move forward? Is there anything that could be done? Who knows? Maybe not, who knows? But then she goes on to talk about how, you know, as white people should probably just, instead of just acting like you're against racism and a racist system, to actually, you know, do some real work. Not just put on a show, but to actually do something real that can be, that's quantifiable, that can produce results, to actually show, hey, you know, I really do care, not just to put on a show. The author did a great job highlighting the issues facing anti-racism. I think what the author did well was not holding back. I don't think that the author was writing to try to appease any type of group of people, which is good. I think it should be just an authentic, honest conversation about the difficulties you know she has encountered speaking to white people about race. I don't think that the book was intended to cause white people to behave or do anything different, take any sort of action or anything. I think it was just a discussion on her feelings, discussion about racism, being able to just have a powwow about exactly why a lot of times it's difficult. I think it's a really good read, especially for this day and age. So that's it. If you have read the book, or if you're reading the book, or if you're gonna read the book, please let me know, and let me know what your thoughts were on the book. I think the next book I want to read is this book called This Will Be My Undoing by Morgan Jerkins. I think it's going to be a good book, and I think it's going to actually be pretty entertaining as well. So that's it. Talk to you later. Bye.